Greetings to my existing channel subscribers and any new viewers coming across my channel. My name is Jonathan Bellasorti, and I'm looking to run an investigative channel to provide reading and analysis throughout my journey of understanding geopolitics behind 9/11 and other very, very important events in our country's history, as well as the geopolitical history of the world, using verified sources of information provided by government agencies, news reports, and many other sources. And I hope to seek out verified sources of information and do my best to stray away from my belief, providing speculation, as I hopefully that our eventual goal will be to understand more about the persons/agencies involved directly or indirectly in the 9/11 attack, amidst the large fog of misinformation currently embodying the 9/11 truth movement, which has culminated in the current view of our society that puts a very negative light on individuals who are genuinely trying to do the best in researching for justice for families in hopes of potentially being in some sort of legal case against individuals to provide justice to the victims, family members who were attacked on that fateful day of September 11th, 2001. Today I will be covering specifically documents related to a case filed by the defendants who are the family members of the victims of the September 11th, 2001 attacks, as well as estate planners of the victims versus the defendant, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as well as many other co-defendants such as Dallah Avco Transportation Company. This case was filed in March of 2017, and the plaintiffs brought this action against the defendant under the 2016 Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which Congress enacted over a presidential veto. That Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act provided civil litigants with the broadest possible basis consistent with the Constitution of the United States to seek relief against foreign countries wherever acting and wherever they may be found that have provided material support directly or indirectly to foreign organizations or persons that engage in terrorist activities against the United States. Now, to set a precedence and a foundational definition of this case, let's go back to the original document, which is the complaint filed by the defendant, or by the plaintiff against the defendant, so that we can get a better understanding of the actual backing and complaint provided by the plaintiffs. So it's the original document in the Ashton et al. Versus the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia case. And let's start with Number 3. Plaintiffs seek such relief against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the attributable acts of the kingdom's governmental ministries and bodies, alter egos, and officers, employees, and agents acting within the scope of their office, employment, or agency by knowingly providing material support and resources to the Al-Qaeda terrorist organization and facilitating the September 11th attacks in that, as set forth in detail herein, they A. raised, laundered, and paid substantial financial support to Al-Qaeda to fund its budget and terrorist activities, including the preparation and execution of the September 11th attacks. B. Funded the terrorist training camps in Afghanistan where Al-Qaeda indoctrinated and taught their hijackers the skills they used to carry out the September 11th attacks. C. Provided critical logistical support and resources to Al-Qaeda around the world, funding safe houses, furnishing false passports and travel documents, transferring Al-Qaeda money, weapons, and equipment across international borders, and other assistance, all of which enabled Al-Qaeda to conduct the September 11th attacks. And D. Actively supported Al-Qaeda in its final preparations for the September 11th attacks through a network of the kingdom's officers, employees, and or agents who met with and aided the hijackers, providing them with money, cover, advice, contacts, transportation assistance with language and U.S. culture, identification, access to pilot training, and other material support and resources. So a very hefty claim against the defendants here by the plaintiffs, all of which has been, in my opinion, heavily documented. However, As of recently, many important documents have been released related to an investigation conducted by the FBI right after the September 11th attacks called Operation Encore, as well as the PENTTBOM investigation, related to potential Saudi complicity and involvement with aiding the hijackers, such as similar to the plaintiff's case, or the plaintiff's complaint here. The reason why I came across this case and wanted to introduce it to my viewers is because, one, potentially many 9/11 observers may not know about this case. They may understand that there was a case to provide a victim compensation fund for the families, or for the families of the victims of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. However, this lawsuit was filed in 2017. So it was relatively recent, 7 years ago, about 7 years and 3 months ago. Well, it's not too recent, however, it is within the decade, so it is a very important case. And the reason why it's a very important case today is because there's a very important decision coming up very soon in the next month related to this case. Let's get to that document. This document is document number 323, filed on the 30th of May, 2024. The defendant here, Dallah Avco, Trans Arabia Company, as well as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, are looking to provide a motion to dismiss for the case. And this decision will be held and decided on July 10th, 2024 at 9:45 a.m. Now remember that for my viewers who actively are investigating the September 11th, 2001 attacks, this is going to be a very important decision. In my opinion, probably not going to be covered by too many news agencies, other than a very, very important news agency, Florida Bulldog, and many, or maybe some other offshoot news agencies. However, in the mainstream media, I believe that it probably won't be covered once a decision is made in the case. And the reason why I am covering this is because I came across it in the Florida Bulldog website under 9/11 news, and I wanted to cover the article that is related to this document as well as to the lawsuit overall. Now up here I have many articles and areas that I hope to provide to the viewer today. However, I don't want to have the video go over more than an hour. That might be too long. So for the viewer or listener, in my opinion, I find it very easy to listen to many of the channels that I watch related to the September 11th attacks. It's mostly listening as well as writing notes. However, I know everybody is different. Some people may be visual, so I will be going through the documents, and you can read along with me if you are reading or watching on your laptop or phone. And I hope that this information is very important, as I hope it gets out to a larger public sphere than it might have if this wasn't released. I understand that my channel is small. However, I think providing this information is vital. It is very, very vital to continue some sort of rational, valid, truth-seeking community of 9/11 that hopes to build a more enhanced and stronger community based on facts related to the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Honestly, hoping to stray far away from the likes of Alex Jones in particular. So let's get into the article that Florida Bulldog published. Now, Florida Bulldog published this story at May 15th at about 5 a.m. It's make or break time for the 9/11 families' lawsuits. Saudis seek dismissal despite overwhelming evidence. This is done by Dan Christensen. He's the owner of FloridaBulldog.org. The arguments are in, and now it's up to a federal judge in New York City to decide whether the momentous civil lawsuit pitting Saudi Arabia against the 9/11 wounded and families of the 2,977 dead lives or dies. The kingdom's essential arguments in its public statements and motion to dismiss are simple. We had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda's September 11th, 2001 jetliner attacks on New York and Washington, and even if we did, every legal claim against us should be dismissed because we are a sovereign nation and America's courts have no jurisdiction over us. The plaintiffs say they have assembled overwhelming evidence that, in fact, Saudi government officials and agents comprised an essential support network for pro-jihadist extremists, including the first arriving 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. That evidence is sufficient under the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, the 2016 federal law that allowed Americans to sue foreign countries that provided direct or indirect support for terrorists, to overcome Saudi Arabia's claim of sovereign immunity, they say. Hazmi and Mihdhar, who entered the U.S. through Los Angeles International Airport on January 15, 2000, were two of the muscle hijackers who were later aboard American Airlines Flight 77 when it crashed into the Pentagon. The record about them was developed, court papers say, through the court process of legal discovery and documents obtained about the FBI's once secret investigation of possible Saudi involvement in 9/11, codenamed Operation Encore. For those new viewers or existing viewers who may not explored my channel deeply, I do have many readings of those documents, Operation Encore documents. President Biden released a large trove of documents through the FBI through Executive Order 14040 that I have been reading up on. Very important documents that I hope to continue reading and publishing videos on. There are just a ton of pages to cover. So let's continue. The existence of Encore was first discovered by Florida Bulldog during Freedom of Information litigation against the Department of Justice in 2016. Several thousands of pages of Encore documents were later declassified and released pursuant to an executive order by President Biden in 2021. The Saudis' two-page motion to dismiss was filed last October by its lawyers at the Washington, D.C. law firm Kellogg, Hansen, Todd, Fiegel, and Frederick. Its separate supporting memorandum of law, 75 pages, was filed under seal, but a redacted version was made public last Friday, May 10th. And we will be covering a portion of this. I actually have it up right now. We'll be covering it after I read the rest of this article. So the plaintiff's 71-page motion in opposition, filed Tuesday, May 7th, by a trio of law firms representing many thousands of individuals, is in some ways a truncated update to the 9/11 Commission report published in 2004. For example, the 9/11 Commission was unable to determine what Hazmi and Mihdhar did or where they stayed during the first 2 weeks after their arrival at Los Angeles International Airport on January 15, 2000. Years later, the FBI determined, and witness testimony confirmed, that the pair went immediately to the King Fahd Mosque in nearby Culver City, where Fahad Tumeri was the imam by appointment of the Saudi government, the motion says. For the next 2 weeks, Hazmi and Mihdhar were put under the care of Mohammed Johar, whose family was close to Tumeri. Johar looked after the hijackers' every need, including housing, transportation, and day-to-day living requirements, the motion stated. Johar admitted in his deposition to being relieved when they moved to San Diego, given how demanding they were of him. Johar testified that he did not see the hijackers interact with anyone other than himself and Tumeri during this period. Another example is evidence plaintiffs received from London's Metropolitan Police Service, including the complete version of the videotape of a party for the future hijackers Hazmi and Mihdhar at their San Diego apartment in early 2000. The tape was found among the belongings of Saudi spy Omar al-Bayoumi when the MPS raided his residence shortly after 9/11. That complete party video is different from a version the FBI produced to the plaintiffs, and the duration and content of the complete video shows that it is also different and more complete than the one the FBI provided to the 9/11 Commission, the motion says. An analysis confirms that the party was organized by Omar al-Bayoumi and his collaborators to introduce the hijackers to a carefully curated group of like-minded community members and religious leaders who could be trusted to look after the hijackers and cocoon them in a protective support network. Contrary to the 9/11 Commission's understanding based on the incomplete video if reviewed, the complete video confirms that the hijackers attended and participated in the party throughout, and they held special status at the event, the motion says. The casing video. Further, there are also intriguing new details in the motion about the casing video. Bayoumi is allegedly to have made a U.S. Capitol video whose existence only became public last winter, and it was seized by London police. According to the motion, Bayomi narrated the video for an audience he addressed as his esteemed brothers in the video. Bayomi surveys the U.S. Capitol at length and repeatedly orients the Capitol to other surrounding landmarks, and especially the Washington Monument, the highest landmark in Washington, and carefully films and notes the Capitol's structural features, entrances, and security posts. Bayomi makes remarks throughout reflecting hostility to the West and Congress, including the senators who make all the decisions. The plaintiff's motions also describe a web of alleged terrorist connections among various Saudi officials from the country's Ministry of Islamic Affairs, MOIA, working inside the U.S., and their cohorts. Bayomi and Fahad al-Tamari, a Saudi consular affairs officer and religious leader in Los Angeles. Bayomi and Tamari are described in a 2012 encore document released to Florida Bulldog in 2016 as been having tasked with helping the two future hijackers by Musaid al-Jarrah, deputy head of Islamic affairs at the Saudi embassy in Washington. In the Saudis' memorandum of law, their lawyers write that neither Bayomi nor Tamari knowingly assisted the hijackers and that their work for Saudi Arabia had nothing to do with helping terrorists. They also assert that there is no evidence that Saudi Arabia operated an extremist MOIA enterprise. One other Saudi official received special attention in the 9/11 plaintiff's motion, Ismail Mana, a consular office for Islamic affairs in Los Angeles, is alleged to have been part of the essential support network for pro-jihadist extremists that included the future 9/11 hijackers. Like other of the MOIA operatives, Mana was a virulent extremist who was close to Tamari, the motion says. The Saudis dispute that, too, saying Mana was a contract employee at the consulate whose primary duty was a translator. Mana has never been involved with terrorists and condemned the 9/11 attacks, says Saudi Arabia's memorandum of law. He had never heard of the hijackers' names before the attack and did nothing to assist them. A theory of remarkable coincidences. That kind of back and forth is frequent, but it is in a section dubbed Saudi Arabia's narrative is unbelievable that the plaintiff's case is most strikingly understood. It contends the kingdom's arguments are anchored in an utterly implausible theory predicated on a series of unbelievable coincidences. Saudi Arabia posits that al-Qaeda deployed Hazmi and Midar to the United States with no advanced plans for assistance. And then by pure happenstance, they went immediately to the precise mosque that was the Saudi government's established receiving point in California for MOIA extremists linked to al-Qaeda. At that mosque, which just happened to be headed by an extremist MOIA propagator with deep ties to terrorism, known as Fahad al-Tamari, Hazmi and Midar had the good fortune to secure immediate assistance and housing from a congregation member whose family was close to both Tamari and the consular officer Mana. Mohammed Johar, whom Saudi Arabia theorizes they met by pure chance. Fortunately by the hijackers, Johar was willing to fully dedicate himself and go to extraordinary lengths to accommodate and support them during their 2 weeks in Los Angeles. Johar is relieved from this burden in Saudi Arabia's telling when the lightning bolt of coincidence strikes again, and the hijackers go to a restaurant in Los Angeles and meet Omar al-Bayomi, who lives in San Diego, but happens to be in Los Angeles that day. This chance encounter occurs immediately after Bayomi happens to have a private meeting with Mana at the consulate and then stopped at the King Fahd Mosque. The terrorist's remarkable good fortune continues when Bayomi strikes up a conversation with the hijackers and happens to mention that he lives in San Diego, the precise city al-Qaeda leadership had designated as the best location for them to settle and begin their attack preparations. Without hesitation, the hijackers packed up to embark for San Diego 2 days later, where they again, by pure coincidence, run into Bayomi, who, according to Saudi Arabia, never encouraged them to relocate to San Diego and never offered help in any way. This is especially fortunate for the terrorists, as Bayomi is immediately available and amenable to go to extraordinary lengths to get them settled in San Diego, including by securing housing in his apartment complex, assuming legal and financial responsibilities by co-signing their lease, and providing funds just below the suspicious activity reporting threshold of $9,900 to help them open a bank account. The plaintiffs argue that the hijackers' luck was amplified when Bayomi hosted the party at their apartment, which happens to be attended by a radical cleric who was a European leader of an al-Qaeda affiliate, All of this sheer luck leads the hijackers' seamless settlement in San Diego and the provision of the support they precisely required to commence their attack preparations. By another remarkable coincidence, as a raid of Bayomi's apartment immediately after the attacks revealed, Bayomi had prepared and was in possession of a drawing of a plane alongside the calculation used to discern the distance at which a target on the ground would be visible from a certain altitude. The raid also uncovers a videotape shot and narrated by Bayomi in which he surveys the U.S. Capitol. Again, the kingdom assures that there is an innocent explanation for why these items are in the possession of its agent, who provided early and essential assistance to Al-Qaeda members who were tasked to use a plane as a weapon and navigate to its targets on the ground, including the U.S. Capitol specifically. Not surprisingly, given the facial unbelievability of Saudi Arabia's narrative, the evidence shows that its theory of remarkable coincidence is demonstrably untrue, the motion says. Now what's to come? Now we'll see what New York City U.S. District Judge George Daniels thinks. To date, he's shown skepticism about the plaintiff's case, even dismissing Saudi Arabia in 2015. That action prompted Congress to pass JASTA and override President Obama's veto in 2016, putting the kingdom back on the spot. In 2018, Daniels ruled the lawsuit could continue, but limited discovery to factual allegations about alleged Saudi agents, Bayomi and Tumeri. It's important to keep in mind that every scrap of information the 9/11 plaintiffs' lawyers have developed to date is about what happened in Southern California before the attack. That's the only place that Daniels has allowed them to conduct discovery. Very limited, very limited. Thus, their lawyers have yet to examine what happened in other locations where the hijackers are known to have lived or visited, including Miami, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Sarasota counties in Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, suburban Washington, D.C., northern New Jersey, Boston, Massachusetts, and Portland. A very important researcher who just recently passed away has a wonderful documentary and very, very important information related to the Florida cell, specifically the ringleader Muhammad Atta. His name is Daniel Hopsicker. The Venice Flying Circus is the book. He does have also very short documentaries about them that are very, very important and insightful to watch. I hope to maybe record one and post on my channel as an archive. Anyways. It will also turn up the heat on King Salman and his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to settle the case to stop the steady drip of new facts dropping from the court's dockets. The cost to do that would be in the billions. Whoever wins, an appeal of Judge Daniels' ruling is likely. This is a very important document, given that the plaintiffs have outlined their case very clearly, and the defendants have also refuted that case with 75-page document, which, as this article says, is mostly redacted, but we will cover a portion of that. However, I want to cover that there is another article about the alleged video recovered of Omar al-Bayomi casing the U.S. Capitol. I wanted to cover that document or that article as well. So the new video is said to show Saudi spy who aided 9/11 hijackers casing the U.S. Capitol. And let's not forget also that there also are reports of the future hijackers casing airports. There is a story by the New York Post that is titled 9/11 terrorists caught testing airport security months before attacks, where at least 3 eyewitnesses spotted Al-Qaeda hijackers casing the security checkpoint at Boston Logan's Airport months before the 9/11 attacks, and they saw something and said something but were ignored. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of show the relevance to this as to why the casing, what is the justification for the casing, and why the response from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is just not wrong, but it's just flawed in many ways. So as the massive 9/11 lawsuit against Saudi Arabia plods on toward a looming decisive moment, tantalizing bits and pieces about new evidence are once again trickling out. The most dramatic disclosure is the existence of the video that purportedly shows Omar al-Bayoumi casing the United States Capitol according to a January 26th order by U.S. Magistrate Sarah Netburn, which was unsealed Thursday. Bayoumi, publicly identified by the FBI as a Saudi spy, is one of two Saudis with extensive contacts to two 9/11 hijackers in Southern California, into whom the court has allowed a limited inquiry by attorneys for the 9/11 plaintiffs. The other Saudi is Fahad al-Tumeri, who was then both a local religious leader and an official at the Saudi consulate in Los Angeles. The video was among a collection of documents and footage released to the plaintiffs in March 2022 and December 2023 by London Metropolitan Service, which investigated Bayoumi shortly after the al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on New York City and Washington on September 11, 2001. Court records say Bayoumi made the recordings while on a trip to Washington, D.C. in June to July of 1999. Plaintiff's lawyers had retired FBI agent Bassem Youssef analyze the video, and he is apparently the person who characterized Bayoumi's actions as casing the Capitol. Either the Capitol or the White House have long been considered the targets of the United Airlines Flight 93 hijackers, who were ultimately defeated by passengers who stormed the cockpit and caused the hijackers to push the jet down into a field near Shanksville. Everyone on board, 44 passengers and 4 suicide hijackers, died. Saudi Arabia moves to dismiss. News of the video's existence comes as the kingdom and its co-defendant, the Saudi-based aviation service company Dallah Avco, recently made extensive court filings, many closed to the public, seeking to have all the claims against them dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. That is, the court has no jurisdiction to decide the case because no evidence has been presented that Saudi Arabia has done anything wrong. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia did not support the horrific terrorist attacks that struck its long-standing ally, the United States of America, on September 11, 2001. Lawyers for the kingdom wrote in a 42-page redacted motion to dismiss filed in late November. Those attacks were carried out by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, whose leader, Osama bin Laden, had years earlier declared Al-Qaeda an enemy both of the United States and Saudi Arabia, long before the 9/11 attacks. Saudi Arabia's most senior political leaders revoked bin Laden's citizenship, froze his assets, and worked to bring him to justice. Its most senior religious leaders denounced terrorist attacks as contrary to Islam. Allegations that Saudi Arabia has been anything but a friend to the United States or anything but a foe to Al-Qaeda lack any basis in fact. The plaintiffs' 9/11 victims and family members countered on December 20th with 2 briefs, an averment of facts, and hundreds of documentary and multimedia exhibits. All those materials are sealed, unfortunately. Magistrate Netburn's order was a ruling on defense efforts to quash portions of those materials as improper due to violations of the court's discovery orders and briefing schedule. She granted part and denied part of those efforts. FBI records declassified and made public following President Biden's Executive Order 14040 in September 2021, requiring the Bureau to review and release as many records as possible from Operation Encore. Its once secret probe into Saudi complicity in 9/11 identified Bayoumi as one of about 50 ghost employees who were paid by Dallah Avco but didn't do any work. Bayoumi is known to have helped hijackers Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar with numerous day-to-day activities, like finding a place to live shortly after they arrived in Los Angeles in January 2000. He has told authorities that he met the future hijackers by chance at a Los Angeles restaurant. Hazmi and Mihdhar were part of a 5-man al-Qaeda crew that commandeered American Airlines Flight 77 and crashed it into the Pentagon, killing themselves, 53 passengers, and 6 crew members. Another 125 people in the Pentagon died, and 106 were wounded. Neither Bayoumi's video of the Capitol nor Youssef's report about it are public, and in her 14-page order, Magistrate Netburn ruled that it won't be allowed into evidence because plaintiffs' attorneys were late in providing a copy to the defense. This is in violation of court rules, and as a result, prejudiced the defense, which had no opportunity to challenge Youssef's findings. An earlier, timely report by Youssef was not affected by the order. It addressed Saudi Arabia's use of diplomatic outposts in the District of Columbia and Los Angeles to export extremism. The roles of Tumeri and Bayoumi in those efforts, and the significance of Saudi Arabia's support for extremism to the operation's success of the 9/11 attacks, Netburn wrote. It remains in the case as expert testimony. Lawyers for Saudi Arabia won most of their challenges. One they did not win, despite Netburn's conclusions that the plaintiffs had violated the spirit of the court rule, was their attempt to exclude parts of the plaintiff's 2,118 paragraph statement of the facts offered to the foil of the Saudis' motion to dismiss. The rule regarding how factual averment should be presented to the court was intended to streamline arguments and spare the court from scouring hundreds of exhibits to find potentially dispositive nuggets of information, Netburn wrote. She then cited from a 1991 case, after all, judges are not like pigs, hunting for truffles buried in the record. Yet, after concluding that the plaintiff's presentation leaves the court no choice but to root around in the averments, she stated that Saudi's proposed remedy, striking the entire passage of offending text, would go too far. New witnesses excluded. Netburn sided with the Saudis in deciding to exclude the declarations of 3 new fact witnesses, Brian Widener, Usman Madha, and James Heavey, and the expert witness declarations of William Adams. And insofar as the Bayoumi casing of the Capitol video, Bassem Youssef, the principal reason, the failure to timely disclose the new witness to the defense. The order describes Weldner as an ex-FBI agent and longtime consultant of the plaintiff's counsel, who gave a sworn statement about the purpose and significance of a 130-page July 2021 FBI report. Madha was a regular attendee at 2 Los Angeles mosques and worked for the Islamic Foundation of Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah from 1998 to 2013 in the capacity. He had contact with Tumeri and other people of interest in this litigation. He made a timely declaration regarding those contacts and was deposed by the defense in 2021. But 2 years later, he reviewed footage and photographs released by London's Metropolitan Police Service and wrote a second declaration that was excluded. Heavey is identified in the order as a Greenwich Parks and Recreation employee whose declaration discusses the visibility of the World Trade Center from Greenwich Point Park in Connecticut on Long Island Sound. The significance of this isn't discussed further. Expert witness Adams is described as a digital visualization specialist who provided reconstruction of an event based on video, photographs, and floor plans. A February 9th letter from plaintiff's lawyers to Netburn asked her to unseal her order, but also all the parties supporting and opposing filings. That includes the Saudis' exhibits and all reference materials produced by the Metropolitan Police Service. Given the tremendous public interest in the vast multi-district litigation addressing the liability for the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil, the bright light cast upon the judicial process requires that the public have access to not only the court's decision, but also to all of the materials placed before the court, and the relevant performance of the judicial function and useful in the judicial process, wrote attorneys Robert Hayfill of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and Sean Carter of Philadelphia. In this instance, those materials include each of the letters and of all the exhibits placed before the court for the court's consideration in determining the defendant's motion to strike evidence from the record for the 2 defendants' pending dispositive motions. The public's continued confidence in the judicial process requires that the public have access to both the decision as well as what was available for the court to consider in reaching its decision. In her order this week, unsealing her January 26 order, the magistrate gave lawyers for Saudi Arabia and Dallah Avco until February 21st to respond to the plaintiff's request to unseal all other material. So that is very, very important, given the filing by Saudi Arabia to dismiss the case. Let's get into that. And I want to get into one specific section because I want to leverage that against the sourced 9/11 Commission report, as well as Operation Encore files, as well as documents and articles from ProPublica, investigations from ProPublica, and different articles, especially a very important article that is published by NorthJersey.com related to Omar al-Bayoumi. So Saudi Arabia filed this on 2024, May 10th. And I want to focus on a specific portion of the document. The document is going to focus on the claim that the plaintiffs cannot rely on the FBI documents. So let's get to that. FBI documents and investigations. So let's go to that. All right. So the plaintiffs cannot rely on FBI preliminary materials and investigative theories. The plaintiffs cannot rely on conclusory statements that set forth what FBI agents suspect or hope to prove. Plaintiffs erroneously contend that such documents are factual findings from a legally authorized investigation under federal rule of evidence. But an interim report subject to revision and review does not satisfy the express requirement of the rule for the findings of an agency or official. The statement must constitute the conclusion of governmental agency as opposed to a mere accumulation of information, and it must not be an interim or preliminary document. One preliminary document that the plaintiffs have mischaracterized as an agency finding, as discussed in Saudi Arabia's opening brief, is a statement in FBI internal reports that Al-Jarrah tasked Al-Tumeri and Al-Bayoumi with assisting the hijackers, and which the FBI later described as an investigative theory. Another example is an FBI July 2021 electronic communication prepared after the FBI closed Operation Encore. The FBI July 2021 communication consolidates earlier preliminary materials that the writer located and copied, while cautioning that it should not be considered an intelligence assessment, and that the writer was not investigating or reinvestigating the 9/11 investigation because of a lack of resources or analytical assistance. In addition, the court should disregard the plaintiff's preliminary FBI materials because the source of the information and other circumstances indicate a lack of trustworthiness. In assessing trustworthiness, the court considers the timelines of the investigation, the special skills or expertise or experience of the official, whether a hearing was held and at the level which it was conducted, and possible motivation problems. As to the timeliness, many preliminary FBI materials at issue were created years after the 9/11 attacks as part of the Operation Encore, which began in 2007. As to skill, there is no record evidence of the skill of the investigators who created preliminary materials, but also no reason to ascribe to them greater skill than the authors of the 9/11 report. The joint 2004 FBI-CIA report, the 9/11 review report, and the FBI's May 2021 electronic communication, all of which constitute final findings of government investigators, and all of which rejected the theory the senior Saudi officials directed al-Bayoumi and al-Tumeri to help al-Hazmi and al-Midar, or that the Saudi government otherwise assisted the hijackers. That an agency head did not accept the recommendation of the report. Operation Encore also conducted no hearings, and its preliminary materials were not met for public review. As for the motivation problems, Operation Encore was no neutral fact-finding expertise. Some of the very interim reports plaintiffs seek to admit describe Operation Encore as seeking to prove that al-Tumeri, al-Bayoumi, and al-Jarrah provided assistance with the knowledge that al-Hazmi and al-Midar were here to commit acts of terrorism. Several Operation Encore agents now work for plaintiffs. Treating their work product as evidence rather than advocacy would depart from the common sense manner in which Rule 803, Section 8 should be applied. Alright, so that basically gives the reason as to why the FBI documents, specifically some of the most recent FBI documents released from 2021 from President Biden's Executive Order 14040, shouldn't be trusted. And I want to leverage that against some important investigations done by ProPublica. So basically, ProPublica did an investigation into Operation Encore, and specifically Omar al-Bayoumi. And I want to focus on this article titled "Focus of 9/11 Family's Lawsuit Against Saudi Arabia Turns to a Saudi Student Who May Have Been a Spy." It's very interesting that Saudi Arabia states that the FBI is an untrustworthy source, even though the FBI has specifically admitted to the fact that Omar al-Bayoumi was an agent for the Saudi Arabian government. So I don't know why. I mean, that is out there for people to read. However, will people read it? I'm not sure, but if you would like to take the documents that I am reading and glean that information for yourself, you can. I will source all of these in my video description. But it's very interesting, the claims that the defendant made in that previous document that we read. It was only from that one section. However, I thought it was very pertinent given that my most recent readings and videos are of the FBI documents released. There are thousands of documents, and I have only gleaned the maybe 300 to 400 pages. So it's very, very detailed, large. So really doesn't give you time to focus on anything else. You have to be very good at time management. Anyways, let's get to this ProPublica article. So 20 years after the September 11th attacks, declassified FBI documents have changed a big piece of the story about possible Saudi government's help to the hijackers. Families of the victims want more information. From the first weeks after the 9/11 attacks, suspicions about a possible Saudi government role in the plot have focused on a mysterious 42-year-old graduate student who welcomed the first two al-Qaeda hijackers after they had landed in Los Angeles in January 2000. The Saudi student, Omar al-Bayoumi, claimed to have met the two terrorists entirely by chance. He said he was just being hospitable when he helped them settle in San Diego. Both the FBI and the 9/11 Commission supported Bayoumi's account, dismissing the suspicion of agents who thought he might be a Saudi spy. After nearly 20 years, however, the FBI has changed its story. In documents declassified last year, the Bureau affirmed that Bayoumi was in fact an agent of the Saudi intelligence service who worked with Saudi religious officials and reported to the kingdom's powerful ambassador in Washington. See, that is such an important paragraph, and I hope if you glean anything from this video, glean that this directly refutes the claim made by the defendant, Saudi Arabia, to dismiss the case against them by the plaintiffs, and that the FBI somehow hadn't made that conclusion about Bayoumi, and now that it's released, it's just it's laughable to see that they are still making that claim, even though FBI has made the conclusion that Omar al-Bayoumi is, in fact, an agent of the Saudi intelligence service. Those revelations have now become a central point of contention in a long-running federal lawsuit in New York, where 9/11 survivors and relatives of the 2,977 people who were killed are seeking to hold the Saudi government responsible for the attacks. Lawyers for the families argue that the new evidence so contradicts earlier Saudi claims that they should be allowed to seek new information from the country's intelligence service about Bayoumi and other officials who reportedly aided the hijackers, Fahad al-Tumeri. Saudi Arabia has a duty to tell the truth about the intelligence roles of Bayoumi and Tumeri based on its actual, complete knowledge, the plaintiffs wrote in a motion this month. The federal magistrate who is managing the discovery in this case, Sarah Netburn, has so far sided with the Saudis, finding no compelling reason to reopen the document search or order new interviews with Saudi officials. The family's lawyers have asked a judge overseeing the case, George B. Daniels, to overrule her. The Saudi government has always denied playing a role in the 9/11 attacks. A joint CIA-FBI report in 2005 concluded that there was no evidence that the Saudi government or royal family knowingly provided support for the 9/11 plot. It also claimed that there was no information that Bayoumi was a Saudi intelligence officer, or that he wittingly aided the hijackers. Now, let's not forget the infamous 28 pages, which is the final section of the December 2002 report of the Joint Inquiry into Intelligence Community Activities before and after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, conducted by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, that summarizes the leads describing financial, logistical, and other support provided to the hijackers and their associates by Saudi Arabian officials and suspected of being Saudi agents, declassified in about 2016. I will hopefully, if I remember to source that video in my channel. Any viewers that have not watched that video, I read the entire document page by page for the viewer, so please check that video out in my channel. Regardless of the impact that Bayoumi's information might have on the litigation, it has already rewritten an important part of the story about how the al-Qaeda plotters took their first incongruous steps in Southern California. The chief architect of the attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is said to have denied that the hijackers had any Confederates waiting for them in the United States. After being tortured by his CIA captors, by the way, tortured over 140 times, Muhammad told them that he instructed the first two hijackers to present themselves at local mosques as newly arrived students seeking help, the 9/11 Commission stated. The two Saudis, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were known to both Saudi intelligence and the CIA as al-Qaeda operatives. The CIA was watching as they joined al-Qaeda planning meetings in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in the first days of January 2000, but the agency said it lost track of the two when they flew out of Bangkok and then to Los Angeles on January 15, 2000. The CIA did not alert the FBI for more than a year after it learned the terrorists had entered the United States using their real names and Saudi passports. Yes, the CIA did not inform the FBI until August of 2001 that Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar were in the United States using their real names. Mihdhar and Hazmi, who were both in their mid-20s, were notably ill-equipped to make their way in the West. They spoke almost no English and understood little about American culture. When they tried to take flight lessons in San Diego, their instructor quickly gave up on them because their language skills were so poor. For years after the attack, FBI investigators were uncertain how the two hijackers spent their first 2 weeks in Los Angeles. But later evidence suggests that they arrived almost immediately at the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City, just down the street from Sony Picture Studios. The White Marble Mosque was an anchor of the Saudi government network of religious operatives who propagated the kingdom's conservative Wahhabi faith around the United States. Some clerics and others in the network also worked with the Saudi intelligence service, reporting on Muslim communities and keeping an eye on dissident Saudis overseas. Saudi government officials and intelligence officers were directly operating and supporting the entities involved with its network, the FBI stated, in a lengthy 2021 synthesis of reporting on the Saudi connections that was declassified last year. The FBI's initial investigation of the 9/11 plot focused in part on Tumeri, a 32-year-old cleric who served the religious networks as an imam at the King Fahd Mosque while also credentialed as a mid-level diplomat at the nearby Saudi consulate. In 2007, the FBI began a follow-on inquiry, Operation Encore, which delved more deeply into the mosque's ties to the hijackers. One witness, vetted by both the FBI and CIA, told Encore investigators that Tumeri asked a trusted parishioner, Mohammed Johar, to house the two Saudis after they arrived in Los Angeles. The informant said Johar was also told to take the hijackers to the small halal cafe where they met Bayoumi on February 1st. In interviews with ProPublica, Johar minimized this help for the two men and denied that it came at Tumeri's request. Although FBI witnesses suggested that Bayoumi received instructions at the consulate to go to the cafe, he claimed he just happened to stop there for lunch and introduced himself after he heard Hazmi and Mihdhar speaking Gulf accented Arabic. I remember in the response to the defendant's motion to dismiss, the plaintiffs specifically state that there are too many chance encounters that occur with Saudi Arabia's story. One of them being Omar al-Bayoumi's meeting with Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar in the halal restaurant in Los Angeles, called the Mediterranean Restaurant. Although Bayoumi said that he suggested that his compatriots move to San Diego, which they did 3 days later, he arranged for them to rent an apartment in his building, set up a bank account for them, and briefly lent them $1,558 for their rent and security deposit. He also introduced them to various Muslim immigrants to help them with tasks like setting up personal computers, starting English classes, and getting driver's licenses. The FBI office in San Diego, suspicious of Bayoumi's ties to local Muslim extremists, had begun a preliminary investigation of his activities in 1998. Rather than attend graduate school, agents found, Bayoumi frequented local mosques, doling out money for various causes and frequently videotaping visitors in an unsubtle way. He reportedly put up $400,000 to start a mosque in San Diego suburb of El Cajon. Throughout his time in the United States, Bayoumi was paid a stipend and other expenses as a ghost employee of a Saudi contracting company known as Dallah Avco, the FBI reported. Nonetheless, an FBI official, Jacqueline McGuire, testified to the 9/11 Commission in 2004 that Bayoumi's initial meeting with the hijackers appeared to be a random encounter. The Commission, which interviewed Bayoumi in Saudi Arabia, judged him a devout, outgoing man, and accepted his denials that he was a spy. That sounds like a perfect spot, and I understand there's more to this article, but that sounds like a perfect spot to source some commentary provided from the 9/11 Commission report, specifically from a couple pages. So, page 170. Al-Qaeda appears to have relied on a core group of financial facilitators who raised money from a variety of donors and other fundraisers, primarily in the Gulf countries and particularly in Saudi Arabia. Some individual donors surely knew, and others did not, the ultimate destinations of their donations. Al-Qaeda and its friends took advantage of Islam's strong calls for charitable giving. These financial facilitators also appeared to rely heavily on certain imams at mosques who were willing to divert donations to Al-Qaeda's cause. Page 218 of the 9/11 Commission report talks more about Omar al-Bayoumi. Al-Bayoumi is a devout Muslim, obliging and gregarious. He spent much of his spare time involved in religious study and helping run a mosque in El Cajon, about 15 miles from San Diego. It is certainly possible that he has dissembled about some aspects of his story. However, perhaps to counter suspicion, on the other hand, we have seen no credible evidence that he believed in violent extremism or knowingly aided extremist groups. Well, in that context, I don't believe the 9/11 Commission was privy to the FBI Operation Encore investigation, given the 9/11 Commission occurred prior to the beginning of the Operation Encore investigation. It is certainly possible that he has dissembled about some aspects of his story. On the other hand, we have seen no credible evidence that he believed in violent extremism or knowingly aided extremist groups. Our investigators, who have dealt directly with him and studied his background, find him to be an unlikely candidate for clandestine involvement with Islamist extremists. So that's the original commentary. And see the importance of saying that the 9/11 Commission report isn't all wrong. It's just that it doesn't provide the full picture. And the reason why is because there were so many sets of documents and information that they did not have access to, that today, as you can see, the FBI is certain that Omar al-Bayoumi was an agent for the Saudi intelligence services. So 15 to 20 years later, the narrative changes. However, many people don't follow that and actually don't update themselves on that. So they might still have that old knowledge that potentially Saudi Arabia doesn't have any involvement in the 9/11 attacks through Omar al-Bayoumi or Fahad al-Tamari or other agents working with the government of Saudi Arabia. However, as you can see, the opinion of many agencies within the United States government has changed over the years. So I wanted to cover the last commentary about Fahad al-Tamari as well as Omar al-Bayoumi and their contacts with Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. So let's get there. It's page 217 of the 9/11 Commission report. When interviewed by both the FBI and the Commission staff, Tamari has denied preaching anti-Western sermons, much less promoting violent jihad. More to the point, he claimed not to recognize either Hazmi or Mihdhar. Both denials are somewhat suspect. He likewise denied knowing Omar al-Bayoumi, a man from San Diego we will discuss shortly, even though witnesses and telephone records established that the two men had contact with each other. Similar to Mary's claims not to know Mokhtar Abdullah is belied by Abdullah's contrary assertion. On the other hand, Tumairi's undoubtedly met with and provided religious counseling to countless individuals during his tenure at the King Fahd Mosque. So he might not remember two transients like Hazmi and Mihdhar several years later. The circumstantial evidence makes Tumairi a logical person to consider as a possible contact for Hazmi and Mihdhar. Yet, after exploring the available leads, we have not found evidence that Tumairi provided assistance to the two operatives. We do not pick up their trail until February 1st, 2000, when they encountered Omar al-Bayoumi and Kaisan bin Dan at a halal food restaurant in Venice Boulevard in Culver City, a few blocks away from the King Fahd Mosque. Bayoumi and bin Dan have both told us that they had driven up from San Diego earlier that day, so that day so that Bayomi could address a visa issue and collect some papers from the Saudi consulate. Bayomi heard Hazmi and Midar speaking in what he recognized to be Gulf Arabic and struck up a conversation. Since Bin Don knew only a little Arabic, he had to rely heavily on Bayomi to translate for him. Midar and Hazmi said they were students from Saudi Arabia who had just arrived in the United States to study English. They said they were living in an apartment near the restaurant but did not specify the address. They did not like Los Angeles and were having a hard time, especially because they did not know anyone. Bayomi told them how pleasant San Diego was and offered to help them settle there. The two pair then left the restaurant and went their separate ways. So let's continue on this ProPublica report. So more than a decade later, McGuire repeated to a 9/11 review commission that Bayomi's dealings with the hijackers appeared to be accidental. The Encore investigations strongly disagreed, but their small team was disbanded in 2016 by senior FBI officials in New York. A more definitive FBI report that was declassified last year validates the Encore agent's suspicions. That document, dated June 14, 2017, states that from 1998 until the 9/11 attacks, Bayomi was paid a monthly stipend as a co-optee of the Saudi General Intelligence Presidency via then Ambassador Prince Bandar bin Sultan Al Saud. In the lexicon of intelligence gathering, a co-optee is generally a diplomat or other official who is recruited by their government's spy service for a specific task or mission, usually of lesser importance. The information that Bayomi gathered on persons of interest in the Saudi community in Los Angeles and San Diego and other issues which met certain GIP intelligence requirements would be forwarded to Bandar, the FBI report says. Bandar would then inform the GIP of items of interest to the GIP for further investigation/vetting or follow-up. Allegations of al-Bayomi's involvement with Saudi intelligence were not confirmed at the time of the 9/11 Commission report, the report notes. The above information confirms these allegations. See, literally was the perfect time to read those sections of commentary from the 9/11 Commission report, because as you can see, it states that they did not have viable evidence to prove that Fahad al-Tamari or Omar al-Bayomi were agents of the Saudi intelligence services. However, as you can see, documents declassified most recently refute that. Another FBI report dated the following day cites recent source information as confirming Bayomi's work for Saudi intelligence services. We could see from a block away that Bayomi was an intelligence guy, the lead agent on the Encore team, Daniel Gonzalez, said in an interview. It's evidence now that he was tasked with helping the hijackers, that he was running a clandestine operation. So who was running it? The FBI documents do not clearly answer that question, but they add detail to an existing picture of calls and meetings among Bayomi, Tamari, and members of the Saudi government's religious network around the time of the hijackers' arrival in California. Just before meeting with the hijackers, Bayomi met at the Saudi consulate with an official who worked with Tamari, one witness told the FBI. After meeting Hazmi and Midar, the source told investigators Bayomi met with Tamari at the King Fahd Mosque. Tamari has denied that he helped the hijackers. Several days later, as Bayomi was setting up the hijackers' bank account in San Diego, telephone records gathered by the FBI show that he called Tamari, one in a series of calls between the two men. Around the same time, Bayomi also called the Yemeni-American imam in San Diego, Anwar al-Awlaki, who would later emerge as the leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Although it was known that al-Awlaki had contact with the hijackers in San Diego, he was still viewed as a Muslim moderate for several years after the 9/11 attacks. But newer FBI documents suggest that al-Awlaki might have played a more significant role in working with Bayomi to help Hazmi and Midar. Al-Awlaki was killed in Yemen in 2011 by a drone strike ordered by President Barack Obama. Several of the most recently declassified FBI documents, including the 2021 synthesis, also shed new light on the relationships of Bayomi and Tamari with key figures of the Saudi network that operated in the United States. Between January and May 2000, the report notes 2 cell phones associated with Bayomi registered 24 calls to the Saudi consulate, 32 to the embassy in Washington, and 37 to the Saudi Cultural Mission in Virginia. Bayoumi made a series of calls right before and after the hijackers arrived in San Diego to Mutaib al-Suderi, a Saudi cleric who had visited him in California months earlier. Suderi, who nominally worked as an administrative official at the Saudi embassy in Washington, lived for several months in Missouri with a Palestinian-American man who reportedly procured satellite phones and other equipment for Osama bin Laden. Suderi was also linked to suspected al-Qaeda operatives in Saudi Arabia, the report says. Both Bayoumi and Tumeri were also repeatedly in touch with Musaid Ahmed al-Jarrah, a key figure in the Saudi religious network who was a senior figure in the Islamic Affairs section of the Washington embassy, FBI documents indicate. Jarrah had a controlling, guiding, and directing influence on all aspects of Sunni extremist activity in Southern California, and numerous contacts with terrorism subjects throughout the U.S., 2021 report says. At the Washington embassy, Jarrah acted as a senior officer of the Saudi intelligence service. He was a close aide to the longtime ambassador, Bandar, and worked for Bandar again after he returned to the kingdom to lead the National Security Council. Jarrah was forced by the FBI to leave the United States because of his suspected extremist ties. Neither a spokesperson for the Saudi embassy nor lawyers for the Saudi government responded to the questions about the FBI's documents' assertions about the roles of Bayoumi, Suderi, Jarrah, and Bandar. While the Bayoumi revelations and others might be embarrassing for the Saudi government, it remains unclear why successive U.S. administrations kept so much of the 9/11 investigation secret for so long. As recently as 2020, former Attorney General William Barr blocked the disclosure of FBI and CIA documents on the grounds that they constituted state secrets. Some of these documents were later released under an order that President Joe Biden signed in September 2021, days before the 20th anniversary of the attacks, but some records being sought by the 9/11 plaintiffs are still being withheld. Included call logs from a cell phone that Bayoumi is believed to have lent visiting Saudi operatives. In response to questions about the 2020 report and the Bayoumi disclosures, the FBI said in an email that it had nothing to add about the documents released through the executive order process. Although the many unanswered questions about Bayoumi, Tumeri, and others who aided the hijackers, the biggest is who might have organized that effort. Although the Saudi intelligence services and the kingdom's religious network sometimes worked in concert, they had distinct agendas. The religious network sometimes acted independently or even at cross purposes with the government. Given the abiding mystery over how CIA lost track of Hazmi and Midar in Malaysia, some former FBI investigators have speculated that Bayoumi might have been asked to approach the hijackers as part of a U.S. or Saudi intelligence operation to recruit them. At the time, former officials have said the CIA was trying desperately to develop sources inside al-Qaeda. The CIA has long denied that it allowed the hijackers to come into the United States as part of a failed recruitment effort. The theory gained some currency with statements by former White House counterterrorism coordinator Richard Clarke that it was a plausible explanation for the CIA's failure to track the first two hijackers and its long refusal to alert the FBI of their presence in the United States. But such a theory does not explain the CIA's apparent lack of attention to Hazmi and Midar's whereabouts or Bayoumi's sometimes disinterested relationship with them. Netburn, or whether the answers to such questions might emerge from the federal lawsuit, remains to be seen. Netburn, the magistrate, had notified the plaintiffs that she would only reopen discovery in the case if there were extraordinary circumstances. So far, she has not been persuaded enough that the new information about Bayoumi's work for the Saudi intelligence agency meets that standard. The Saudi government, which has long denied that Bayoumi or Tumeri aided the hijackers on behalf of the kingdom, dismissed the plaintiff's appeal to reopen discovery as more or the same. Starting in the fall, the court will also hear arguments on a motion by the Saudi government to dismiss this case. It's clear from the evidence that the Saudi intelligence was at the center of the network that aided the hijackers as they prepared for the attacks that killed my father, said Peter Brady, the son of the finance executive, Michael G. Jacobs, who died in the World Trade Center. We urge the courts to allow further inquiry on families, further inquiry. Our families and the American public deserve answers and accountability. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's a great place to end this video. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope you gleaned very, very important pieces of information from this. Hope you have a great night and a great rest of your weekend. And thank you for following through and listening to the end. Bye.